Welcome to the latest addition to the Compliance Podcast Network, the podcast 10 for 10, which brings you the week's top 10 compliance stories curated together in one podcast each week. Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, brings you the compliance professional stories you need to be aware of at the end of your busy week. Sit back and in 10 minutes, hear about the stories every compliance professional should be aware of. Every Saturday, 10 for 10 highlights the most important news, insights, and analysis for the compliance professional, all curated by the voice of compliance, Tom Fox. Get your weekly filling of compliance stories with 10 for 10. Hosted by Tom Fox. 10 for 10 is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. First, a word from the sponsor of the Compliance Podcast Network for this month, Ethico.
In the intricate world of ethics and compliance, each second is precious, and slow case closures are more than just delays, they're missed opportunities. Enter Ethico. Our solution revolutionizes case management, cutting closure times in half and turning every challenge into a chance for improvement. Imagine a workspace where efficiency and compliance coexist harmoniously. Don't just dream of faster resolutions, make it your reality. Visit ethico.com/CPN today to book a demo and dive into our exclusive white paper by Tom Fox, the ROI of Compliance, and to try our free ROI calculator. Empower your team with the tools they deserve.
10 for 10 for the week ending March 30, 2021. We have several stories from the Wall Street Journal today, and we're going to begin the first one with a story about baseball. And it's Shohei Ohtani, whose translator has been fired after having stolen or used $4.5 million of Ohtani's money to pay off gambling debts. There's no allegations against Ohtani at this point, and he has denied ever having bet on baseball. So nothing in the record askance to Ohtani, but I think it's a great story for compliance professionals about why subcontractors are so important. And you have to really look at the entire package of who is coming to the table as your player, as your business partner, as your employee, whatever it may be. Next up, from the risk and compliance component of the Wall Street Journal, Dylan Tokar reporting that former Mongolia's prime minister is having 2 luxury apartments targeted for forfeiture by the U.S. government. They are both in Manhattan, and it is monies, or they were purchased by shell corporations, which allegedly had money skimmed from a $68 million mining contract while one Bart Bold, I won't even try to pronounce his first name, but the former prime minister was in power. The forfeiture action is the latest case by federal prosecutor that highlights the alleged use of shell companies. Of course, we have to note that the Corporate Transparency Act has now been declared unconstitutional by at least one court. The next story from the Wall Street Journal, Risk and Compliance Journal, this time Mingy Sun reporting that KuCoin and its founders face criminal charges over money laundering violations. U.S. prosecutors have filed criminal charges against the cryptocurrency exchange KuCoin and 2 of its founders, accusing them of violating U.S. money laundering laws. The indictment charges KuCoin with violating the Bank Secrecy Act and operating an unlicensed money transfer business, along with conspiracy charges. The CFTC has filed parallel civil charges against KuCoin for operating an illegal digital asset derivative exchange. Well, that's a mouthful. And for multiple violations of the Commodities Exchange Act. Next up, more Chinese companies are to be added to the U.S. import ban list. As reported by Richard Vandefort, the Biden administration will enlarge a list of companies under import ban because their alleged ties to forced labor in China, a move that will intensify pressure on some corporate supply chains. These companies are added to the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act entity list, a Department of Homeland Security consultant advised. Next up, a very interesting story from Al Jazeera, which points to corruption as a key component for people trafficking in Southeast Asia. There's a lot of different forms of trafficking that can include moving people across country lines, human trafficking, slavery, sexual trafficking, and others. But corruption is a key component of what's leading to this international scourge. Next up, in a story from the Washington Post, prosecutors in South Africa allege that the former parliamentary speaker of South Africa took $135,000 and a wig in bribes over a 3-year period when she was the defense minister. The speaker has not been arrested or charged, and prosecutors spoke at a court hearing over the claims that her claims that authorities hadn't properly informed her of the allegations. So more corruption allegations out of South Africa. Next up, we have 2 very interesting stories on neurodiversity. The first one comes to us from the BBC, which reports that EY, who's global chair of DEI, has talked about the untapped pool of neurodiverse workers and how they can lift businesses and employees alike. She said that her DEI group oversees some 400,000 people across 150 countries, and during her tenure, she's taken strides to incorporate programs for an underemployed group, neurodivergent workers, as they really want to invest in this space and have a bigger talent field or playing field for the talent available to them. The next story comes from the Financial Times, which reports that workplace neurodiversity claims are on the uptick, and that particularly after the end of the year reviews and other times, employees who receive less than satisfactory reviews are often making claims that the company has not met them around their neurodiversity claims. I found this really interesting, as many new companies are struggling with the same issue of how to incorporate this into a employee plan. All of the cases share similar traits. Employers were mentioning conditions such as autism and ADHD for the first time once they had been put on some form of performance management plan, or PMP, or face dismissal. The crossover between employee privacy, performance management, and managing any neurodivergent condition is always complicated, and for both employers and employees. One of the most interesting things about this is the divergent in age workforces, where Gen Zs have received support for their neurodivergent conditions in school, both primary school and university, yet they don't have it in the workforce. And our final story comes to us from The Guardian, which reports about a suppressed official report on alleged corruption in a giant British-Saudi arms contract for the 1990s has been discovered in a public record. And the significance of this is quite profound in the United Kingdom, as many had sought this report, particularly Liberal Democrats and others had called for its release on 3 different occasions. And it contains damning evidence of bribery in a specific deal. More importantly, or equally importantly, it shows that the Minister of Defense lied when they testified to Parliament, and it really details the level of the corruption, very fact-based, and it's going to be interesting to see how, if at all, the UK government, whether this one or the incoming one after the next election, will use it, considering it's some 30 years old. As I mentioned at the start of this podcast, this month's sponsor for the entire Compliance Podcast Network is Ethico. Have you ever wondered how to show the ROI of your compliance program? Have you struggled with the budgeting process, getting the funds you want for your compliance program? Well, I've partnered with Ethico to put together a white paper on the ROI of compliance, which shows you not only how to demonstrate ROI, but also how to speak finance when you're sitting across from the CFO with your budget proposals. check out the website and get the white paper. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of 10 for 10. I hope you will check out the newest podcast in the Compliance Podcast Network, the Compliance Tip of the Day. In Compliance Tip of the Day, I give a 5 to 8 minute summary of one tip that you can integrate into your compliance program or put together for greater compliance program efficiency.